Really, there are two ways to view this film. Through the lens of a fan, comparing it to the original source material, or through the lens of judging it as a movie in its own right. Certainly not the worst film ever made. My personal recommendation is, if you view it more as a comedy or a parody, you're gonna have a really good time with this movie. To me, a film is good depending on whether it elicits more of a positive reaction in me than it does a negative reaction. And I do have to say, I was laughing quite a bit during this film. I'll argue up and down for the rights of remakes, reboots, and adaptations from different cultures and different time periods to exist. First thing that you need to know, first and foremost, is that this isn't really a Death Note movie. It's really more of a Final Destination meets High School Musical with aspects of Death Note sprinkled through it. It's like they were making a generic high school love story about the whiny kid that listens to too much My Chemical Romance and dresses in all black, and then they were going down a checklist. Okay, we gotta have Shinigami in there, check. We gotta have a guy named Light, check. We gotta have a Death Note in there, we gotta have some iconic scenes and references to the original series. That is a must. And then we also have to have an L, a Watari, and a Ryuk. It's this bizarre mix of things that they get right, clashing absolutely with things that they get so very wrong. Like, Watari and Ryuk were pretty close to their original counterparts, with some pretty amazing casting by William Dafoe as Ryuk. But it's so weird, it just feels as if they took these really good, amazing characters and just plonked them in a completely different universe. A complete alternate universe. It's like that Weird Al song, everything you know is wrong. Ryuk was by far the best part of this. I have to say I absolutely loved William Dafoe's performance as Ryuk. I'm never gonna get tired of saying that, it's such a fun word to say. Ryuk. Ryuk. And I like that you actually genuinely felt his presence throughout the film, unlike the original Japanese live-action films, which, though they were more faithful to the original manga, it just felt weird having this CG monstrosity following Light around every single place he went. But I don't know, maybe I'm completely alone on that one. It just looks so fake and cartoony, in a similar way to how Scooby-Doo appeared in his film. You're probably going to get a unique perspective when it comes to me, because there are a lot of things in this film that I personally liked or found funny, that other people likely just found annoying. But when I was watching it as its own movie. I wasn't particularly looking for things actively to nitpick. And as a result, I ended up having a really good time with this film. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, I know, reliable source, Tsugumi Ohba and Takeshi Obata, the original creators of Death Note, have praised the film, with the former stating, in a good way, it both followed and diverged from the original work, so the film can be enjoyed, of course, by not only the fans, but also by a much larger and wider audience. But part of me's getting Dragon Ball Evolution flashbacks of when Akira Toriyama praised that film, and then later went back on his words. Likely because even when a film is bad, either you're contractually obligated to praise it, or you typically want stuff based on your own property to do well. But I'm inclined to agree. For example, one of my favourite series in the world is Mega Man, hence my username, and next year there is going to be yet another American animated Mega Man television series, and so far, I have to say I'm not really liking the look of it. But I'm remaining cautiously optimistic, and best case scenario, even if it doesn't faithfully adapt the games, it'll be bringing a franchise that I love to today's children, a much more mainstream audience, and I can't fault the company for going down that road if it'll get people talking about it, and make such an iconic character relevant again. Sometimes changes can be a good thing. It's when you change too much and lose the essence of what people liked about the source material that you've gone too far. It's always been a balancing act, honestly. I mean, a lot of people say that they shouldn't have done an American version of Death Note in the first place, but hypothetically speaking, what would you do if you were handed this project and forced to adhere to this premise? You can't change too much from the source material or people will get mad. You also can't not change anything, because if you adapt some things word for word, there'd be no point in adapting it in the first place. You may as well just watch the originals at that point. Not to mention, a lot of things that work in drawing do not translate well to live action. L in this film being a good example of that, where they tried to emulate his mannerisms, but in some ways it just looked awkward. In my opinion, they either should have gone over the top with the anime stylization, or gone for something a little bit more subtle. Now, some companies will adapt the cartoony aspects of a series when they adapt it into live action as a stylistic choice for humorous effect. I know a few Japanese live action dramas that use speed lines and exaggerated movements like they're characters straight out of an anime or a manga, but if Death Note had done that, it probably would have removed some of the serious tension behind the series. You also have to condense a story that worked better as a 20 to 30-hour series into, at best, an hour-and-a-half Netflix film. So of course, a lot of the slow, atmospheric shots, general plot points, and character development had to go out the window. And even with all that, they still didn't manage to tell a whole story. The director of this film has stated that when he pitched it to Netflix, it was always supposed to be a 2 to 3 film story. So it's interesting to think that if this fails, which it most likely will, a sequel isn't going to get made. Because the film's ending was ambiguous. They did leave this open for a sequel, and it will be the first and only Death Note adaptation ever made with an incomplete story. Yes, even after they've cut a lot of stuff out of the original, they still haven't actually finished the Death Note story, and I am curious to see if it'll continue. I actually kind of want them to make a sequel, out of curiosity as to where they're gonna go with the story. And before people go around and accusing me of not being a real fan, I adore Death Note. I marathoned the original anime series several times. I loved the 2 Japanese live-action films, the recent 2015 drama adaptation, and the recent Next Generation film. I'm not some outside observer looking in who's never seen Death Note, but I also don't hate this film, like a lot of people seem to. But you can take my words with a grain of salt if you like, because, full disclosure, I also liked the Ghostbusters 2016 film. The more I let it sit with me, the more I can't actually tell whether or not I really like this film. I mean, I enjoyed it, but just because I enjoy something, it doesn't necessarily make it a good film. Some films are so bad that they are good, and there's certainly a lot of that in this movie, with a lot of laughably bad scenes. To be honest, there are a lot of bad films that I enjoy for the comedic value. There are things that they changed that I liked, and there's things that they changed that I didn't like. There's things that they kept the same that I liked, and there's things that they kept the same that I didn't like. Would I recommend it though? Well, if you're like me, and are just looking for a good laugh, then yeah. I find the gore effects in this to be hilarious. But if you're looking for an actual, legitimate Death Note movie, I wholeheartedly recommend finding a subtitled version of the 2015 Japanese live-action drama. If you haven't seen it, that'll satisfy your Death Note craving more than this film will. This film is good by fan film standards. Like, if some Death Note fans from film school were given a huge budget and told to make a movie with some of their friends, that is this movie. And as a fan film, I have to say, it is probably one of the best fan films ever made. 5 stars! If I was forced in the director's seat though, I probably would have made a completely different movie. I probably would have given it less of an 80s pop tune visual aesthetic, and given it more of a gothic vibe, like the original Death Note. There would have been more of a focus on the detective aspect of the series, as well as the cat and mouse game that Light and L plays in the original, which is completely downplayed, if not removed entirely, from this adaptation. I would have kept in a lot of characters which for some reason the film decided to do without, like the original police team or Misa's Shinigami, Rem. L would not burst out in anger at the slightest bit of stress, and Light wouldn't just freak the fuck out over everything. The thing that was most enjoyable about these characters is how calm and collected and calculating they were, even in the darkest and most stressful of times. That is what made these characters likable, and for some reason in these films, these characters just scream and freak out at the drop of a hat. There is so much screaming in this film, just screaming all of the time. It was definitely a lot more of an action film, and I can definitely see what they were going for with it, but Death Note was never supposed to be an action movie. It was never supposed to be an action popcorn film, although I will admit, I did find it to be visually spectacular. So, if nothing else, it had that going for it. If it were up to me, I would have scrapped the entire love story. Light never loved Misa in the original Death Note. To Light, Misa was just a means to an end. He was using her and her Death Note. Yes, they dated in the original series, but he was not a good boyfriend. That's just how it was, and that's how it should have been in this film. From adaptation to adaptation, I've noticed a change throughout. From the original Death Note anime series, to the live-action Japanese Death Note film, to the live-action 2015 Death Note drama, to the Netflix American Death Note film. They've started to humanize Light, for lack of a better term, make him more relatable. In the original Death Note, I'm pretty sure that Light didn't fear the Death Note. Sure, there were some hesitations, but once he got used to it, once he knew what he wanted, there was no stopping him. He had this complete god complex about himself, which is absent from this film, and it's been fairly absent from a good majority of the Death Note adaptations. Even in the original Japanese live-action Death Note adaptations, both the film and the drama television show, Light seemed to have this sort of Breaking Bad thing going on, where he'd start off as a little bit of a goody two-shoes, and over time he'd become bad. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure exactly which I prefer. Having Light instantly become that way, or having him slowly transform over time. Light Turner barely had his god complex intact at all. Like, he talks about being a god at some points, paying the idea lip service, but you don't actually believe it as much as you believe the original Light Yagami. I am a firm believer in the idea that there is no such thing as a bad premise, only bad execution. An American Death Note could have done really well, and there are elements of this film that do well, but ultimately it misses the point and settles for just being mindlessly entertaining, and I don't mind mindlessly entertaining. There is a time and a place for mindlessly entertaining. But even despite this, L did not crack jokes. L in the original was a prankster. He made jokes. He wasn't always doom and gloom and serious and calculating all the time. There was a comic relief aspect to him, which the Netflix version of L doesn't have as much of. In fact, it doubles down on trying to make him appear calculating and intelligent, and always way too serious for my liking. But I will give the film credit for keeping true to his version of justice. The serious aspects of L they certainly kept intact, but they drained the character of all comic relief and likability. Oh, and there's no potato chip scene. I can forgive so much about this film, but the fact that they cut out the iconic potato chip scene is a sin that I cannot forgive. Maybe they're saving that for the sequel that'll never come. That's the other thing that bothers me. The vague cliffhanger ending. Let this go down in the history of films that never got a sequel, that ended on a cliffhanger of all things. If they do make a sequel, it would be nice if it went the way of the Michael Bay Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sequel or the Inspector Gadget sequel. If this is the official version of Death Note that we have now as Westerners, it is too late to reboot it, it's too late to make a new one, but if they are going to continue the franchise, maybe they can fix it. Which I secretly hope that they do. They will need to listen to some of the criticism and work on some of their shortcomings in future installments, because I do want to see what they do with this version of Light and L. I want to see those two characters interact more, because there was barely any of that in this film. Heck, turn it into a sitcom for all I care. Oh yeah, that is the last thing I'd probably change about this. If I were in charge of Death Note, if I were put in charge of Death Note's American counterpart, I would have made it an episodic series instead of a film. Death Note simply does not work abridged. Now, I'll give the director some credit. From reading interviews, it seems he did take the source material very seriously, claiming that Light and Mia were sort of created to portray aspects of the original Light Yagami. Like one character split among two, constantly conflicting with each other. And I can sort of vaguely see what they were going for, but that is kind of another reason why I want to see a sequel. I feel as if the intention was for Light to start out as an angsty, generic teenage stereotype and slowly transform into the cold, calculating, smart, desensitized mastermind that we see in the original series. And part of me wants to see how this actor would portray that version of Light. And there's a chance for Mia to come back if they introduce Rem, her own death god, into the mix for the sequel. Apparently, from what I've heard, they took the Death Note prop itself very seriously, giving it its own extensive history, including rules and warnings being written in different languages in the book, giving it its own sort of sense of age and mystery. If anything, this is an interesting moment in pop culture history, whether you like or hate the film. Final word, if you're a Death Note fan who will not accept much in the way of change, I'd steer clear of this. But if you are just looking for an above-average popcorn movie with action and gore and a little bit of philosophical debate to make you think to fill your afternoon, all I can say is that I personally had a fun time with it. I just don't know how to feel about this film. I am so conflicted in so many regards, and that might just partially be because I am going against the grain here. When I talked about how much I enjoyed Ghostbusters, the internet would not let me hear the end of it, so I don't know. I just don't know. So I'll leave you with a vague and let you make up your own minds. With that being said, my name is Megamich, and as always, I'll catch you later.